Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entropy Podcast. This is episode 3, and I'm Francis Gorman. Today, I'm joined by Chris Dale, Chief Hacking Officer at River Security and Principal SANS Instructor. Chris, how are you doing?
Doing good, my friend. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. Busy week, but great to sit down and have a chat. Chris, Chief Hacking Officer, really cool job title. What does it entail?
Yeah, so basically, managing pen testing teams is a complicated job because there's all kinds of facets to penetration testing. It's a very progressive field, lots of changes all the time, new developments, new hacking techniques, new systems, new technology. And to be able to manage such a complex operation, to ensure the highest level of quality, to ensure that our pen testers are talented and skilled enough, that they get the help needed, they have the processes and methodologies in place to actually do proper pen testing. Well, that's a chief hacking officer's job.
I kind of want to be a chief hacking officer now, Chris, every time I meet you, you're always a ball of energy, and you're flying around the country doing the SANS training, different locations, meeting different people. What motivates you? Where do you get that energy from?
It's a very fun industry we're in. It's like I've done all kinds of work. Okay, before I did my bachelor's and before I got into computers, I was changing tires of cars. I was in a car repair shop almost. I was working in hotels, like changing people's rooms and cleaning up stuff. I've done all kinds of jobs, and cybersecurity is just amazing because it's never standing still. There's something new every day. I go on a 2-week vacation without my laptop, for example. I come back and feels like the whole world has changed almost. So I find a lot of appreciation in that we're in such a fun industry where we can make an impact on things. We are not severely handicapped by governments or regulations. We're able to basically prove vulnerabilities in pen testing. We're basically, during incident response, able to kick bad people out of organizations, almost like what law enforcement would do in real life. So it's such a really cool place to be, honestly.
I feel the same. I think we are privileged to constantly wake up and have to re-educate as new topics emerge. It's one of the challenges. You just have to hope the brain sticks it.
Yeah, it's like www. Like at school, they teach us it means the World Wide Web, but in real life, it's more like the Wild Wild West. And being a part of a Wild Wild West, we're blessed.
Very much so. And in terms of that, what is, from your perspective, one of the most overlooked security risks companies face in today's technology landscape? Is there anything particular that would jump to the top of your mind?
So immediately my mind jumps to the fact that we're using the same set of credentials in multiple places. It's just not acceptable anymore. But still, people are, even the people in my classes are using a set of few credentials across multiple services. And that's just not acceptable. It just makes it too easy to be a criminal where we simply reuse credentials to log in left and right. And the second one that jumps to my mind is the fact that the supply chain is open right now. I expect there to be cyber weapons being implanted into all kinds of free open source libraries, products, and so on. That is going to have dire consequences in the future when these malicious code implants are being used against us.
Yeah, third-party supplier risk. That's a really hard one to control. When you interface with a lot of different companies and clients, how many of them have an SBOM in place?
A software bill of materials is not very common to see, unfortunately. And for the ones who do have it, right, like keeping it up to date and maintained, at the very least, if you don't have tooling or automation to help you keep these things up to date and maintained, it's challenging to say the least. And I guess this is where we got to make compromises on security. We got to say, look, the supply chain is going to fail us, right? There's a 0 day, there's a supply chain attack, whatever it is. Bob, Chris, somebody double clicks, right? We need defense in depth, and we need to survive we need to be able to survive to see another day, even if we're compromised as part of the supply chain, which is why we should default to have network segmentation, least amount of privileges, monitoring not just on the hosts, but in the network stack, also in our applications, visibility across the enterprise, so we can pick up on when bad things happen, because it's not a matter of if, it's about when.
Is this where offensive security should really start to play a role then?
If offensive security could play a role?
In terms of if you're defense in depth, and then we think about the different components that brings together. If we look at offensive security, for instance, in that perspective, is there a greater role to be played here? A lot of companies aren't doing offensive security; they're doing levels of defense in depth.
Yep.
But it's a complex.
It's very much complex, and it to me, it's all about what kind of value proposition you have and what the customers are left with in values once you're done spending their money. Okay, and there's some different facets to this. One thing is the penetration testing or offensive security from the outside looking in. Okay, that is important. It is important that we keep our guard up, that we patch and get rid of the most common pitfalls, the vulnerabilities that allow people to climb through the walls. Yes, good job. You need to pen test those things and keep vigilant from the outside looking in. But from the inside, that kind of assumed breach, I don't particularly enjoy or like exploiting people. Why would I bother exploiting people? They're going to make mistakes. So we're going to assume the breach. We're going to assume that Chris double clicks, or there's a 0-day, or there's a supply chain attack. Now, once we're on the inside, that assumed breach exercise, if you ask me, should focus on width. We need to do broad testing, and we need to look for important timeless types of defensive measures if they're in place or not. Like, for example, keeping data like locked behind bars. So typically when I'm doing an assumed breach, I see terabytes of data. I see hundreds of thousands of files that I don't need to see. There's not a lot of enforcement when it comes to that internal network segmentation and so on. So we need to start to make sure that pen test focuses on the best practices, not just pointing out that, hey, you're missing some patches. Hey, we could exploit this box. Your question should be instead, why could I see that box? Why could I even authenticate to that box? Why is there no zero trust type of enforcement here where you have to identify the user and the device?
It makes total sense. Is that where a lot of companies, in your perspective, fall down? That they scope a piece of work that's specific to a new piece of infrastructure, and then de-scope everything that sits around it, and boom, you're actually
classic, right? And it's not very fun to do assume breach exercises if you don't see the customers improve from one time to another. The scoping issue is a big one, of course, but the reason why they might just scope that new piece of infrastructure could be because they've been burnt earlier in having a wide pen test done, but they don't have the ideas or the tools to actually start to improve those things. And they're just like going to see the same issues over and over. I'm not sure, but it could definitively be.
And Chris, in terms of an engagement of this nature, what makes it successful and what just makes it fall flat? What are the parameters you need up front to really size, scope, and put the right individuals behind the keyboard in these areas?
So it's a very interesting question, Francis, because an assumed breach should be regarding, so an internal pen test, in other words, it should be regarding something that we're actually concerned about. For example, an area where we have a lot of churn. Maybe we have like a help desk that has people coming in and people leaving the company quite often because people are done with their studies, etc. So we want to test to see what happens when they're compromised. Is there any opportunities to be a malicious insider? Is there any, like, how much of an impact does it have when such a computer or user gets compromised? Or say how Linux tech tips were hacked, right? They have people looking at contracts every single day. There's directors that are reading contracts, signing contracts, and they opened up a malicious attachment. Let's assume that one of our staff, which is in charge of reading attachments and reading PDFs and double-clicking attachments all day, let's assume that such a box and user is compromised. What kind of consequences will that have? And from that perspective, once we've kind of like put ourselves in a more realistic scenario, our job as a pen tester and the resources we assign to the pen test should be able to look at the tools available. And then that's very dynamic, progressive, right? Does this user have credentials saved in the browser? Is there any old cached type of entries, authentication tokens that might be used? We'll do some local reconnaissance and look to see what kind of ammunition might we find here. Is there something that can be used inwards towards the network? And then we'll do network reconnaissance and look for openings. Can we speak to 1, 2, 3 different services, or 2, 3, 400 services? It's a huge disparity or difference between having a network which only provides you what you need to have access to versus open flat networks or networks that are not properly segmented. Because that will help define the way of the pen tester's next move. And I think that we need to have a dialogue here. Look, once I'm on the inside and I see 100, 200 different services, it's obviously that you're going to have some things that you should improve on, okay? There's probably not enough network segmentation, and that can be challenging to implement and so on. However, what I would do now as a pen tester, I would highlight that as a finding. This is a problem, notable problem, but I'm now going to aim very wide. I'm going to be looking for the low-hanging fruits to pick apart whatever pieces of information that might help reinforce why you need to do network segmentation.
Makes total sense. If you were to give companies 3 pieces of advice based on all the engagements you've had, what would they be?
So, 3 pieces of advice. Assume the breach, yes. So the attackers are on the inside. Whether it's a trusted insider, malicious insider, or just an unsuspecting user, Chris Dale double-click something, the attackers are on the inside. So assume the breach. It's not game over once you're hacked. So you're going to have to win that fight. The attackers need to win. What are they going to win with? They're going to try to achieve some kind of impact, some kind of goals. What are their goals? To ransomware you? Okay, sure. But their goal is not to just ransom you. It is to actually get you to pay. So start looking at how do we survive an attack that is happening from the inside. And to fight, for example, ransomware actors, it would be to have immutable backups and look at building defenses that makes it harder for attackers to spread. 3 different things. I want to conclude it with assume the breach, yes. But is that even advice? It's not just what kind of advice is that, right? So if I were to give advice, 3 things: network segmentation, principle of least privileges, and multi-factor authentication, or some kind of zero trust that allows you to build that network segmentation better. That would be my strategies, or maybe
policy
tactics.
Enforcement engine. I remember talking to John Kindervag, and he's attributed as the godfather of zero trust, but his prime example is the motorcade of the president with the 4 Secret Service agents, 2 front, 2 back, and he calls those their policy enforcement engine, and the motorcade is the critical asset or the crown jewel, and their enforcement is a big machine gun, but our enforcement is firewall policy, intrusion detection systems, whatever you have at your remit. And I think when we talk zero trust, the industry made it a bit of a marketing term, but it really is strategic intent, and that needs to come true. I suppose when we look at these things, you probably have the technologies and the capabilities already within your enterprise to leverage them. You just need to mature them and put the right level of focus on them to get that impact.
100% agree. And honestly, just this weekend, my CTO of River Security, he just implemented zero trust in front of a wiki that we're going to deploy. So using Cloudflare, not Azure's front door, they were too expensive, but using Cloudflare, we basically just said that we're going to have to identify the device and the user before we can make up a determination if the user will be able to even interact with the wiki's dynamic code and features and functionality and so on. And it was trivial to get it done. My biggest concern, Francis, is that we're talking about this now, right? Zero trust, cool, we need it. But when our peers look at implementing it in their enterprises, they become stifled. It's because they look at the whole broad, we're going to look at zero trust for everything, and they do nothing. They become stifled or paralyzed because it's so challenging getting it done everywhere, right? And even new solutions, new deployments, new infrastructure goes without the best practice. They don't implement the best practice for new deployments because they couldn't do it for the legacy. And that's a big fallacy. You can start doing the right thing today, even if you have old legacy systems that are harder to turn around and, say, enforce network segmentation or zero trust or MFA on, and so on.
Yeah, it's a real problem, I think, but it's a people problem. It's cultural, the business wants to run fast, security wants to be secure, and I think the SAPSA framework is the best one in terms of making sure that the business attributes follow through with the security intent. You need confidentiality, make sure everything's encrypted, and your access control is appropriate. You need availability, get your load balancers and your Cloudflare or your front door type content delivery networks in place. Whatever it is, it really is down to the intent, and I suppose being able to execute on that strategic intent needs clarity, and clarity needs people to have an ability to communicate. And I think communication is something, as security professionals, we sometimes tend not to be very good at, and it's probably an area where we need more focus, especially through education. Everyone focuses on the hard technical skills, but if you can't articulate the problem to the people with the money, there's a good chance that you're not getting them implemented in the first place.
For sure, for sure. I think we could reason with the upper management on a strategy that we need to protect our confidential information. We need to protect our customers' sensitive data. We need to make sure that we're not ransomed, etc. We can set together strategies and agree on the long-term leading principles that we agree on, right? But when it comes to the tactics to start to deploy and act on those strategies, this is what I'm mostly concerned about. Which tactics can we deploy, like zero trust, network segmentation, and so on? And which tactics can our teams actually act on in an operational way? Do they have the know-how, the tooling, the hardware to even start to enforce these tactics? And if you have a discrepancy here, then we got to start with realigning our tactics, perhaps.
I also think, Chris, that's a really good point, and being able to weight your detect capabilities versus your prevent versus your recover, restore, knowing where you're strong, your maturity levels in those areas is probably really important for businesses. You may be really poor at recovery, but really strong at, discovery, So
For
it's,
sure.
yeah, discover quick and hope for the best.
Yeah.
In terms of education in the field, we touched on it there a bit, and you're passionate about this field. Seen many videos of being on SANS courses. We've interacted. I think that's where we first met, was in Amsterdam back good few years ago now, when cloud was becoming a thing. The education around security, have we got a problem there? Are we too caught up in the lack of an apprenticeship driven approach and more in certification and that sort of a driver for getting the right talent to the right places?
So I strongly believe there is room for apprenticeships, learning on the job, etc. Even within pen testing, which is considered to be an expert field of work, like you should be an expert when you're going to assess the security of a system. There are rooms to enable people to learn on the job type of training and so on, but it's something completely different than saying that some junior, some apprentice is going to be responsible for delivering a pen test. It's completely different. Today, there's a huge skill gap in the world. There's a lot to go on when it comes to security training. And why my biggest problems with training today, whether it's from books, and I have a library I'm pointing at here, or it's from sitting in classes, is the failure to teach timeless knowledge. It's the failure to teach understanding versus just look at this cool tool, this CVE, run this Python script, see what happens. people are not learning from that. They're amazed. Wow, it worked. I'm root. Why are you root? Why do you have compromise? And seeking that understanding of things that you can build upon, a solid foundation of talent that can take on new and harder challenges is where I see a lot of training and books and many other resources are failing on today. If you look at universities, for example, they become stale and old pretty fast because they fail to recognize that what they put in a book today is changed tomorrow. They need to look at more timeless ways of generating knowledge and teaching knowledge rather than saying, here's some cool hacking technique. OVA's top 10, who cares, right? It's cool, but it's going to change from one year to another. Instead, we should be teaching HTTP. Okay, it doesn't change. We're at HTTP3 now. It's all of a sudden running over the QUIC protocol over UDP. How does that work, and how is attacks happening on top of that? How would somebody discover SQL injection without knowing what SQL injection is? That type of questions and answers is what educators needs to look at.
Is Gen AI going to compound this problem or make it better?
So, unfortunately, Gen AI is trained on existing data material, right? So it's like it's being trained on already material, which is not necessarily the best. So we're going to see good things come out of it and bad things come out of it, whether it's vulnerable code and bad advice, to actual things that will help people comprehend a situation much more. There's no doubt about it. AI will help us greatly. Gen AI, one of my favorite prompts, Francis, is to say, please say ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, teach me this concept, but explain it to me like I'm in third grade, And that kind of dumbing it down or getting help to create abstractions or analogies, the AI is superb in doing.
I was talking to Jimmy White on episode 2, and he was I asked him the question around niceties in AI. Does he say please and thank you when writing his prompts? And he was very quick to say he used to at the start, but now everything is his directive, and he challenged it so that it doesn't bow down to him. So it's an interesting concept. I think how we interact with this technology as well is going to have a real telling to what we get back and the quality of the material. And I think it's also part of, as you said, if it's trained on poor documentation and the individual doesn't have the core understanding of what it is they're actually asking, then no matter what the answer is, it looks genuine.
Oh, for sure. Always very it's very affirmative in this case. Like, this is the answer you're looking for. Of course, I got an answer for you, right? This is what it is, even though it's a hallucination. But what I'm looking for in the future is I'm imagining more, and we're going to not be just utilizing one model in the future. We're going to be using multiple models together in unison. And we're going to be having prompt engineering become one of the most important things that we do. So we're going to, with our prompts, have the same question asked to different models, whether it's Llama, Quen from Alibaba, and OpenAI, and so on. We're going to be asking multiple models the same question with the same prompt, and then we're going to beam it through one single model that is going to be the best result, so to speak. We're going to be beaming the results into a single response that is more likely to be what we're looking for. I think so.
What do you see 2025 is going to bring for us in terms of cybersecurity headaches, considerations, or maybe surprises?
I think we're going to see that security research is going to become easier. There's going to be more vulnerabilities in software that is not necessarily receiving scrutiny today. We're going to see that AI is pretty good at finding software vulnerabilities in open source code, for example. And some people are going to do the responsible thing to disclose those vulnerabilities, but people looking to make a buck, make profits, they're going to be using AI to find vulnerabilities in code, which Shodan, for example, or Census is readily going to have them. Oh, you want 200,000 of instances, public instances of X, Y, and Z? Here you go. And they're going to be armed and weaponized with vulnerabilities that they didn't really have to engineer themselves. AI would guide them into weaponizing vulnerabilities.
That's going to make things really complex. How do we defend against that?
So we're going to have that layer defense, Francis, right? So you put something on the internet. There are a couple of things to remember. Web application firewalls, next generation firewalls in front of it, it will help, sure. But you put something on the internet, you better make sure that you can react and patch it within, say, 24 hours. So you're going to have to be much speedier now than in the past. And 24 hours is kind of like almost too slow today. There's a new patch out there for, say, Atlassian or some product somewhere. Attackers are scanning the entire internet or leveraging pre-existing scan data from Shodan and others, and they're going to be abusing it in less than 24 hours today.
You're not making me feel any better, Chris.
It's challenging for sure, but defense in depth, layer defenses, use the WAFs, they can disrupt the attacks perhaps, make it harder for the attacks to work potentially, but it's not a single silver bullet, It's these systems require love, care, and attention, configuration, etc. So yeah, it's not easy. Limit the attack surface, limit your exposure. Zero trust, great concept. Identify the users and the machine or their hardware and devices before you even allow them to see the infrastructure to interact with it. Are great tactics to put in play.
Across the span of your career, Chris, have you ever come across anything as part of a breach scenario or a compromised company or system where you just went, that was beautiful? How did they think of it? Is there any gem in there?
I of course do sometimes see attack techniques that make me go like amazing. It's not an endorsement for doing bad, but it's like chef's kiss, beautiful execution and everything. And in the beginning, it was more of this. Like in my early days of the career, it was more a novelty, and you found appreciation of many of the hacking techniques that you see being used against our companies. Nowadays, though, the consequences are so dramatic, and it's harder to. There's also less novelty, right? You've seen it all kind of like it's no longer a big surprise when there's something new. But to be honest with you, to answer the question pretty easily, look at Portswigger's top attacks year on end now. I think they're in the second year now. They have had a rating or a sort of not a competition. I'm not sure what word I'm looking for, but they have a top 10 coolest attacks of 2024, 2023. And we're talking about things like dirty dancing in like OAuth flows. We're talking about super interesting SQL injection techniques via overflowing the protocol buffers that are speaking SQL. We're talking about super cool attack techniques that just goes to prove that we're going to be in this industry for a long, long time.
That is reassuring. And one final question, Chris, and I know we'll be up on time then, so I'll wrap it. We haven't seen anything like a Stuxnet in a number of years. With the current geopolitical situation, do you envisage we're going to see more weaponized cyber warfare type events coming out of these countries like Israel or Russia or China or wherever? We're in a very funny time at the moment. Do you think we'll see a Stuxnet that maybe is more harmful or a variant of it?
I would not be surprised. I think there are currently being not just developed cyber weapons, but there's also currently being deployed cyber weapons against our countries and also against potential competing countries that may or may not be used in the future. There's already weaponization going on that it might not be enabled, but the supply chain, for example, is definitively under attack. And who knows if it's going to be used or not, but it could be, right? I think we're going to see something huge, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's the one thing that worries me when every time I go into a car showroom, the cars are almost talking to me. You know, I'm like, should our cars be disconnected, and how many different vendors and code
I don't
vulnerabilities, and
like
when does it
it.
get patched?
When I click the button to turn on my lights, just be a hardwired connection, you know. When I want to open up my car, just mechanics, you know. It's fail safe, you know. It's not hooked up to the internet.
Yeah, I think interesting times ahead, Chris. Look, really, really appreciate having the sit down today and the chat, and thanks a million for joining me on the Entropy podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you.